These black twins can't be mine. Pack your bags, you cheating whore. The DNA test results are in, Mr. Johnson. You might want to sit down before I tell you what we found. In a modest Midwestern town, the husband, a stoic factory worker, had buried his first wife after a long illness. Her nurse, the nurse wife, had shown him kindness during those dark days, and their shared grief led to marriage. But when their triplets were born with dark skin, unlike either parent, his world shattered. Convinced of infidelity, he filed a lawsuit demanding a DNA test. The legal battle tore apart their home, with a nurse wife pleading her innocence while neighbors whispered. Now, in a sterile courthouse, the results would expose a truth far darker than betrayal. Wait, before continuing, if you believe that love can overcome any obstacle, hit that like button and subscribe right now. The husband stood in the living room. He held a worn photograph of the first wife. His fingers traced the edge, the paper soft and frayed. A half-packed suitcase sat by the front door. Legal papers were spread across the kitchen table, a messy pile next to a stack of clean diapers. He heard a small cry from the next room. He abruptly flipped the photograph face down on the end table. The nurse wife walked in, carrying one of the babies, wrapped in a blanket. She looked tired, her eyes red-rimmed. "He's hungry," she said softly. The husband pointed at a suitcase. "Get the others. You're leaving?" The nurse wife stopped. "Leaving? What are you talking about?" "The babies," he said, his voice tight. "Look at them. They aren't mine. You brought some other man into my house while I was grieving." She stared at him, her mouth open slightly. "How can you say that? After everything." "Everything?" He took a step towards her. "Everything includes you lying to me, sleeping around. That's insane." She shifted the baby in her arms. "I was with your wife, caring for her. Then I was with you. There was no one else. Their skin doesn't lie," he shouted. She flinched. "Genetics are complicated. Things happen. Not like this," he spat. "Not 3 times." She took a deep breath. "You think I cheated? With who? When? That's what I'm going to find out," he said. "You're packing your bags, and you're taking them." He gestured at the baby. Tears welled in her eyes. "You can't do this." "I am doing this," he said. "I want you out." She walked towards him slowly. She stopped directly in front of him. The baby stirred in her arms. Her hand came up and struck his cheek. The sound echoed in the quiet room. His head snapped back. Her wedding ring, loose on her finger, clattered against the table as her hand recoiled. It fell to the floor. She didn't look down. "You will regret this," she whispered, her voice trembling. She turned and walked back towards the bedroom with the baby. The suitcase remained by the door. The legal papers sat on the table. The photograph lay face down. The husband sat across from the lawyer's desk. The lawyer, a man with sharp eyes and an expensive suit, leaned back in his chair. "So you're saying your wife, your current wife, had triplets, and they are visibly different from you and her?" the lawyer asked. "They're black," the husband said flatly. "We're not." The lawyer steepled his fingers. "And you believe this is definitive proof of infidelity?" "What else would it be?" the husband demanded. The lawyer shrugged. "Genetics can be surprising. Recessive genes, family history you might not know about. My family is from here," the husband said. "Always has been. Her family too. There's nothing like this." "All right," the lawyer said, picking up a pen. "We can file a complaint. Accusation of infidelity, seek divorce, and potentially damages. Paternity will be the key issue." "I want a DNA test," the husband stated. "That's standard procedure in cases like this," the lawyer said. "We'll request it. It's the fastest way to get a clear answer." He slid a document across the desk. "This is the petition. Read it over. Sign here." The husband didn't read it. He picked up the pen and signed his name with a flourish. He pushed the paper back. "Blood doesn't lie," the lawyer scoffed quietly, more to himself than the husband. "Exactly," the husband said, standing up. "She cheated. I want her out. I want this fixed." The lawyer stood too. "We'll file this immediately. The court will order the test. Then we'll have the proof." The nurse wife sat stiffly beside her lawyer in a small conference room at the courthouse. Her lawyer was a woman with kind eyes, but a firm set to her jaw. "He filed the petition," the wife's lawyer said, "accusing you of infidelity, requesting a DNA test for the children." The nurse wife nodded, clutching her hands together. He thinks not of dad. What did he think? He thinks that I am alone, but I don't think I've been real. All I have to do is ask around. I can't do anything else, and I don't want to be tempted by that which harms me. He thinks something happened. He thinks I'm actually right there underneath the bed, but he thinks I shouldn't be really sober. That's actually wrong, but at the same time, that is bothering me, and that's in need of some seconds. He thinks I brought someone home while I was taking care of his first wife. That's the implication. accusation, the lawyer said. It's a serious accusation, but it's not true. The nurse wife's voice rose slightly. I was there for her, and then I was there for him. There was no one else. Ever. I believe you, the lawyer said calmly. Your character references are impeccable. Your colleagues at the hospital, even some of your neighbors, speak highly of your dedication to his first wife and your love for the babies. He won't listen, the nurse wife said, tears starting again. He just looks at their faces and sees a lie. We will challenge his claims, the lawyer said. We will demand proof and the DNA test. That will be the proof. What if something is wrong? The nurse wife asked, her voice small. The test is highly accurate, the lawyer reassured her. It will show he is the father, and his case will fall apart. He's so angry, the nurse wife said. He won't even hold them. His anger is his problem, the lawyer said. Our focus is clearing your name and protecting your children. We will push for the test. It's the only way to stop this. The husband's lawyer entered the room carrying a stack of papers. He offered a curt nod. We're ready to proceed with the motion to compel the DNA test, the husband's lawyer announced. The wife's lawyer stood up. We agreed to the test. We welcome it. My client has nothing to hide, the husband's lawyer smirked. We'll see about that. The husband sat outside the room, watching them through the glass panel in the door. He saw the nurse wife's face, pale and drawn. He saw her lawyer, confident and determined. He felt a surge of anger. They were trying to trick him, to make him doubt. He wouldn't. He knew what he saw. He knew what had happened. He stood up and walked away from the door. He would get his proof. He would show them all. The house felt cold and empty, even with the babies sleeping upstairs. The suitcase was still by the door. The legal papers were still on the table. The husband sat in his chair, staring at the television, which wasn't on. He hadn't spoken more than a few words to the nurse wife since the accusation. She moved through the house like a ghost, caring for the children, keeping the house in order. But her eyes held a deep sadness and a new wariness when she looked at him. He heard the faint sounds of the babies stirring. He didn't move. He thought about the court, the lawyers, the papers. It was all moving forward. Soon he would have the results. Soon he would be proven right. He heard a car outside. He didn't look. He heard footsteps on the porch. A knock. He didn't answer. He heard a neighbor's voice call out, "Everything all right in there?" Heard things have been just difficult. He stayed silent. He heard the neighbor whisper to someone else, "Those poor babies." Looks just like the voice trailed off. He clenched his fists. He hated the whispers. He hated the looks. He hated that this was happening in his house, in his life, but it wasn't his fault. It was hers. She had brought this on them. He would make her pay. He would get his proof. He would restore order. He looked at the table, at the stack of legal papers. He reached out and straightened them, aligning the edges precisely. He needed control. This was how he would get it back. The husband walked out of the front door. The suitcase was gone. The legal papers were gone from the table. The house felt heavy with silence. He got into his truck. He drove down the street, past the neighbor's house where the curtains twitched. He turned onto the main road. He passed the town park. Children were playing on the swings. A woman was pushing a little boy with curly dark hair. The boy laughed, his head thrown back. The husband watched them as he drove past. He hesitated for a moment, his foot hovering over the brake. Then he pressed the accelerator. He drove faster, away from the park, away from the laughter, away from the questions. He drove directly to his lawyer's office. He had a strategy meeting scheduled. He needed to focus on the case, on winning. The wife's lawyer sat across from the nurse wife in her cramped office. Files were stacked on the desk and floor. Photographs of the triplets were pinned to a corkboard on the wall. His lawyer is being aggressive, the wife's lawyer said. He's digging into everything. Your phone records, your work schedule at the hospital, even old social media posts. The nurse wife sighed. I told you, there's nothing there. I was working, or I was home, or I was with him. I know, the lawyer said. But he's trying to build a narrative to make you look like you had opportunity and motive. She leaned forward. Listen, we could try a different angle. Focus on his emotional state, his grief after his first wife's death. Argue that he's not fit to have custody because he's making these wild accusations and creating a hostile environment for the children. The nurse wife shook her head immediately. No, I don't want to hurt him more. I just want the truth to come out. I want him to see he's wrong. That's admirable, the lawyer said, but this is a legal battle. We need to fight smart. The truth is smart, the nurse wife insisted. The DNA test is the truth. The lawyer looked at her for a long moment. She nodded slowly. All right, we focus on the test. We push for it to happen as soon as possible. She picked up a pen and scribbled something on a small notepad. She tore off the page and slipped it into a file folder on her desk. It read, "Ask him about the night of November 12th. In the courtroom, the husband's lawyer held up a printed sheet of paper. We have here, he announced to the judge, phone records obtained through subpoena. They show a deleted text message from the defendant's phone sent several months ago to an unknown number. The text reads, and I quote, "I can't keep lying." The husband sat straighter in his chair. This was it. Proof. The wife's lawyer stood up. "Objection, Your Honor. This is circumstantial and taken out of context. A deleted text to an unknown number proves nothing." "Your Honor," the husband's lawyer pressed, "this suggests a clandestine relationship, a secret the defendant was keeping." The judge looked at the wife's lawyer. "Can you provide context for this message?" The wife's lawyer walked to the podium. "Yes, Your Honor. We have documentation here. Emails and appointment confirmations showing that my client was seeing a grief counselor during that period. The counselor's number was not saved in her phone, and the text message, as confirmed by the counselor's office, was a message to the counselor expressing her difficulty coping with the emotional strain of caring for the husband's first wife during her final days and the subsequent grief. She felt she was lying by putting on a brave face for the husband when she was struggling internally. The husband's lawyer sputtered. The husband sank back in his chair, the brief surge of triumph deflating. Later, in the courthouse hallway, the husband confronted the nurse wife as she walked towards the exit with her lawyer. "Grief counselor," he sneered. "More lies?" "It was the truth," she said quietly. "Just like everything else I've told you." He reached out and grabbed her arm. "You think you're getting away with this?" She yanked her arm free. Her bracelet, a delicate silver chain with small beads, snapped. Beads scattered across the polished floor, rolling in different directions. One small red bead landed near the husband's shoe. He stared at it. The bracelet had been a gift from his first wife, given to the nurse wife as a thank you for her care. The wife's lawyer stepped between them. "Mr. Johnson, any further communication must go through counsel." The nurse wife looked at the scattered beads, then at the husband. She turned and walked away, leaving the broken bracelet and the tiny red bead behind. The judge sat on the bench, looking down at the lawyers and the parties before him. The courtroom was quiet, the air thick with anticipation. "We are here for the presentation of the DNA test results," the judge stated. "These results are intended to definitively determine the paternity of the children in question and resolve the primary factual dispute in this case." The husband sat beside his lawyer, his face unreadable. The nurse wife sat beside her lawyer, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. She clutched the twins' birth certificates, the paper soft from her touch. The judge paused. He reached for a glass of water on his bench and took a slow sip. The sound seemed deafening in the silence. The nurse wife squeezed her eyes shut for a brief second. The clerk, a stern-faced woman in a gray suit, walked forward carrying a sealed envelope. She approached the husband's table. She stopped in front of the husband and extended the envelope towards him. His lawyer reached for it, but the clerk held it out specifically to the husband. "For the party requesting the test," the clerk said in a clear voice. The husband reached out and took the envelope. It felt heavy in his hand. His name was printed on the front. He looked at the seal, a red wax stamp. He held it for a moment, his gaze fixed on the paper. He slowly tore the envelope open along the top edge. He reached inside and pulled out the document. It was folded in half. He unfolded it carefully. His eyes scanned the page. End of part 1. The husband unfolded the document. His eyes scanned the page. He read the words, then read them again. His breath hitched. His face, moments before set in grim anticipation, went slack. His lawyer leaned in, peering at the paper. "What is it?" the lawyer prompted, a note of impatience in his voice. The husband didn't speak. He stared at the page, his hand trembling. The wife's lawyer watched him, her expression unreadable. The nurse wife sat beside her, her gaze fixed on the husband, her hands still clasped. The husband's lawyer snatched the paper from his hand. He read quickly, his eyebrows shooting up. This can't be right," the lawyer stammered. He looked at the judge, then back at the document. "There must be a mistake." The judge cleared his throat. "Counselor?" The husband's lawyer swallowed. He looked at the nurse wife, then back at the paper. The results indicate Mr. Johnson is the biological father of the children." A collective gasp went through the few people seated in the gallery. The nurse wife's hands flew to her mouth, a sound escaping her lips that was half sob, half cry of relief. Her lawyer put a hand on her arm. The husband stared at the table, his eyes wide, unseeing. "This is impossible," the husband's lawyer insisted. "Look at the children. It's clear they are not." "The science is definitive, counselor," the judge interrupted sternly. "The test confirms paternity." The husband pushed his chair back violently. It scraped loudly against the floor. He stood up, knocking the table with his hip. Papers scattered. He didn't seem to notice. He looked at the nurse wife, his eyes full of confusion and a dawning horror. I can't. I can't. I can't find ways. You said, he started, his voice hoarse. The nurse wife was crying openly now. I told you, she whispered. I told you I didn't cheat. I told you. The husband shook his head, backing away from the table. He looked at his lawyer, who was staring at the DNA results like they were written in a foreign language. He looked at the judge, who was watching him with a neutral expression. He looked at the nurse wife, her face streaked with tears, holding the birth certificates. This wasn't how it was supposed to happen. This didn't make sense. He turned and walked quickly towards the doors of the courtroom. His lawyer called after him, but he didn't stop. He pushed through the heavy doors and was gone. Before telling what's going to happen next, faced with undeniable proof that shatters everything you believed, what is the hardest truth you would have to accept about yourself? Write it in the comments. The husband ran down the courthouse steps, the cold air hitting his face. He got into his truck and started the engine. He drove, not knowing where he was going. His mind was a whirlwind of the words he had read. Biological father. It was impossible. It had to be a lie. But a lawyer, the judge, oh, they believed it. 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 You believed it. Yes, they believed it. They believed it. He drove past the park again, past the swings, past the place where he had seen the woman with a little boy. He kept driving until he was outside of town, the familiar buildings giving way to open fields. He pulled over on the side of a quiet country road and stopped the truck. He gripped the steering wheel, his knuckles white. If the twins were his, then the nurse wife hadn't cheated. He had accused her, dragged her through court, humiliated her, based on what he saw, based on their skin. But if they were his, and the nurse wife hadn't cheated, then how? A memory flashed in his mind. The first wife in the hospital bed, frail and weak. The nurse wife, always there, kind and patient. He remembered the last few months, the blur of illness, his own grief. He hadn't been paying attention. He had been lost in his own pain. He thought about the photograph, the one he kept on the end table. He saw it clearly in his mind. The first wife, smiling faintly, her hand resting on something just out of frame. He started the truck again and turned around. He drove back towards town, towards his house. He needed to see the photograph. He needed to look at it again. He walked into the house. It was silent. The nurse wife wasn't there. He went to the end table in the living room. The photograph was gone. His heart pounded. Where was it? Had she taken it? He searched the room, then the kitchen, then the bedroom. He opened drawers, looked on shelves. Nothing. He went upstairs to the nursery. The triplets were asleep in their cribs. He stood in the doorway, looking at them. Their chests rose and fell softly. They were just babies. His babies. The thought felt alien, terrifying. He saw something taped to the wall above the cribs. It was the photograph. The first wife's face looked down at the sleeping babies. He walked closer, reaching up to touch the paper. As he got closer, he saw it, the torn edge he had noticed before. He looked closer at the part that was torn. It looked like something had been next to her in the photo, and that part had been deliberately ripped away. He heard the front door open downstairs. He froze. Footsteps on the stairs. The nurse wife stood in the doorway of the nursery. Her eyes were still red, but her expression was firm. They dismissed the case, she said quietly. He didn't turn around. He kept looking at the photograph. The test, it was right, she said. They are your sons. He turned to face her. But, how? She walked into the room, stopping a few feet away from him. Your first wife is. She was very sick for a long time. He nodded. I know. Towards the end, she knew she wasn't going to make it. The nurse wife continued. Her voice was low. She wanted you to have children, a family. She knew how much you wanted that. He frowned. What are you talking about? She had an arrangement, the nurse wife said, before she got too sick, with a colleague from the hospital. He was a donor. The husband stared at her. A donor? You mean a artificial insemination, the nurse wife finished. She used a donor, a black donor. She wanted to surprise you, to give you the family you always wanted. He stumbled back, hitting the wall. No, that's not possible. She would have told me she was going to, the nurse wife said. She told me to say it's insensitive personal text. She told me that, and then things happened, and she told me. She planned to tell you when she felt stronger, but she never did. The illness, it took over. She kept a secret, maybe hoping she'd get better, maybe just overwhelmed. He looked at the photograph again. He remembered the torn edge. He remembered the workbench in the garage, the initials scratched into the wood, the faded heart, and another name. He had dismissed it, thought it was old, meaningless. Now is. Who? What is? Who was he? The husband asked, his voice voice barely a whisper. He was a doctor at the hospital, the nurse wife said. He agreed to help her. They were just colleagues. It wasn't an affair. It was something she did for you. The husband looked at the sleeping babies. His sons, born from a secret his first wife kept. A secret meant as a gift, but one that had nearly destroyed his life and the family he had now. He sank to the floor, leaning against the wall. The photograph looked down at him. The faces of his sons were peaceful. I didn't know, he said, the words tearing from his throat. I didn't know. The nurse wife knelt beside him. She didn't touch him. I know you didn't. I accused you, he said, looking at her. I said terrible things. I didn't trust you, even though you cared for her, even though you gave me these boys. You were hurting, she said, and you didn't understand. He looked back at the babies. He had seen their skin and jumped to the worst possible conclusion. He had let his fear, his need for control, blind him to the truth that was right in front of him. He had been so determined to prove her wrong. He hadn't even considered that he could be wrong about the first wife. He reached out a hand towards the crib. His fingers brushed the soft blanket. One of the babies stirred, a tiny hand coming out from under the covers. It was the same hand that had grabbed his thumb that morning, the same broad knuckle. He looked at the nurse wife. I'm sorry, he said. The words felt inadequate, small against the damage he had done. She didn't say anything. She just looked at him, her expression complex. Pain, exhaustion, maybe a flicker of hope. Months passed. The lawsuit was a distant, painful memory. The house was quieter now, the tension replaced by a fragile peace. The suitcase was put away. The legal papers were gone. The husband sat in the living room, watching the twins crawl across the floor. One of them bumped into the end table. The photograph was no longer there. It was tucked away in a drawer in the bedroom. Its edges, once sharp with grief and suspicion, were smooth by time. The nurse wife walked in, carrying a small, mended silver bracelet. The chain was whole again, but one of the red beads was missing, replaced by a mismatched blue one. She held it out to him. For them, she said softly. Not us. He took the bracelet. His fingers closed around it. It was a reminder of the past, of the brokenness, but also of something put back together, even if imperfectly. He clasped it around his own wrist. He was at the grocery store. He pushed the cart, one of the twins sitting in the seat, the other two in the basket. The cashier, an older woman from town, stared at the babies, then at him. Her lips tightened slightly. He met her gaze directly. He didn't look away. After a moment, she flushed and quickly scanned the apples without a word. He paid and left. That night, he walked into the twins' room. He saw the photograph taped to the wall above their cribs. The eldest twin, sitting up in his crib, saw him looking. So we remember, the little boy said, his voice clear and bright. The husband looked at the photo, then at the boy. He didn't move it. Later, as he was getting ready for bed, he stood at the sink. The nurse wife was already in bed, facing away from him. You were right, he said, his voice low. She stirred. About what? That I wouldn't believe the truth if it bit me, he said. The water ran from the faucet. She sat up in bed. She reached out and shut off the water. The sudden silence was heavy. And now? She asked. He dried his hands slowly. In the next room, one of the twins shrieked with laughter in his sleep. Now I hear it, the husband said. The twins raced past the doorway, chasing each other. One of them dropped a crayon drawing. The husband picked it up. He smoothed out the crumpled paper. It was a drawing of stick figures, 3 small ones and 2 larger ones. Beside them, 4 shadows stretched long and dark across the page. He held the drawing for a long moment, looking at the figures, at the shadows.